image problems right now, to put it lightly. So it really doesn't help when OSP troopers are caught on camera refusing to wear masks in a coffee shop and apparently using some colorful language to describe the governor's mandate. And it comes the same day as the state's pushing this PSA, saying masks shouldn't be a sign of weakness or a political statement. Also, Oregon already legalized pot. So now, I guess we're tackling magic mushrooms.
Have you had personal experiences with psilocybin?
But it's not quite as hippy-dippy trippy as you might think. Here's the story.
Got me asking the hard questions. Sir, have you eaten mushrooms? I'm Dan Haggerty. Hi. Welcome to the story. Now, if you watched last night, we had a mask-free episode. Oh, it felt good. It was nice. It was a nice little break, wasn't it? Dan Gallagher, though, tweeted and said, "Hey, Dan, I missed the mask monologues." And I told him, don't worry, don't fret. I'm sure in no time, mask news is going to pop right back up. Well, take a look at your watches because it's no time o'clock, and we got a doozy for you. So let me know what you're thinking. Message me on Facebook or Instagram. You can email us at thestory@kgw.com or use Twitter and that hashtag HeyDan, which is kind of the fastest way to get our attention. All right, let's get started. And I want to start right away with our big mask. Our mask story. Our big story about masks. The topic that continues to defy the odds by seeming like a mundane issue, but strangely skyrocketing to the most divisive subject in the state. To mask or not to mask? According to doctors, it shouldn't be a question. I would like to remind you, though, before we start all this, Oregon saw a record number of cases today, 375 new ones. But that said, tonight, this isn't really about the philosophical debate. We're not going to be talking about the arguments surrounding masks. Instead, we're talking about the actual serious repercussions of Governor Kate Brown's day-old mandate that all Oregonians have to wear a mask inside any and all public spaces. She actually said it is a Class C misdemeanor now if you don't have one. But as threatening as that sounds, the governor also said that police wouldn't really be enforcing it that way. Instead, the role of law enforcement will be to educate. Which is why this first story is so ironic and infuriating and caught on camera. I talked to Maggie Vespa about it earlier. Okay, Maggie Vespa joining me now to talk about this story that, as the news loves to say, is sparking outrage. We're hearing apologies now. We have a trooper on paid leave, all after 4 Oregon State troopers went into a coffee shop and refused to put on masks.
Yeah, and to be clear, they refused to wear masks at any point when they were in the coffee shop, when they entered, when they ordered, because obviously once you're sitting down and drinking, you can't drink through a mask, and that's when they could, in theory, take them off. But they refused to wear them at any point. And this happened yesterday morning in Corvallis. The Oregonian broke this story this morning, and they say the owners of the shop, Allen's Coffee and Tea, gave them this surveillance video of the whole thing. So at the beginning, you see an Oregon State trooper walk in, no mask. Assistant Manager Travis Boss told the Oregonian that he informed the trooper he needed a mask, to which the trooper replied. He says, "Governor Brown has no authority to take our civil liberties. We aren't going to wear masks." And then he said, according to that assistant manager, F. Kate Brown. Seconds later, in the video, you see 3 more state troopers enter, and Boss told the Oregonian they also refused his request to wear masks at any point. He said he was nervous and he filled their drink orders, even though he had turned other patrons away for doing the exact same thing. But the difference was, these guys were in uniform. And again, he was kind of scared. So at the end of the video, which lasts about 4 minutes, you see Boss walk to the table of state troopers. He told the Oregonian that his boss, the shop's owners, told him to tell the troopers to leave and that staff had called Corvallis police. He said as the troopers walked out, one of them said, "That's Corvallis for you." So we should note, we sent a photographer to Corvallis to try and talk to staff at Allen's Coffee and Tea, and we were told they didn't want to do any more interviews. And then we were sent to their corporate headquarters. We haven't gotten a response from them. I also talked to a barista on the phone, and she said, Dan, the attention from the whole thing had been overwhelming, which is understandable.
Yeah, I bet. Absolutely. And for me, let's talk about the timing of all of this. First, the big picture timing of everything that's going on in the country, the scrutiny that law enforcement is under right now, and the questioning of the character of the people behind the badge for this to go on, and then even more specifically, the masks. When this happened, it was day 1 of the statewide mask mandate, day 1.
Yeah, there's so many layers here. And, to point out even more so, this happened around 8:30 yesterday morning in Corvallis. Yesterday, again, day 1 of Oregon's statewide mask mandate. And at 11 a.m., just a couple of hours later, Governor Kate Brown, not knowing that this had happened, held a press conference about the mandate and said this to the cameras.
And today, Oregon, you have a choice that only you can make. What happens next is up to you. It's up to each of us.
So in that press conference, Governor Brown also announced this PSA, which we got a copy of today. It's by the ad agency Wieden Kennedy, and it's called "A Mask is Just a Mask," saying that it shouldn't be something that divides us. And then it ends by saying, this 4th of July, don't accidentally kill someone. So Governor Kate Brown yesterday was feeling pretty positive, it seemed, about this mandate and pretty gung-ho about getting the word out to everybody. And again, at this point, this incident in Corvallis had already happened, and she didn't know it yet, basically.
Oh, she knows now. I'm sure she's seen the video. What did she have to say after watching what happened?
Yeah, the Oregonian story definitely blew up about this, and Governor Brown sent us a statement. It's basically not nearly as positive. In her statement, she wrote, quote, "It is inexcusable that a few Oregon state troopers disregarded my face covering work requirement yesterday and ignored a request from a fellow Oregonian to follow the rule." The governor also called the actions absolutely unacceptable, adding the Oregon State Police superintendent agrees with her, and he also sent us a statement. It reads, "This conduct is embarrassing and indefensible, especially in the wake," and Dan, you mentioned this, "in the wake of thousands of Oregonians taking to the streets each day to rightfully demand police accountability." He went on to say, like any police misconduct, the actions of a few bring discredit to the scores of dedicated officers that do not believe they are above the law they are sworn to uphold. So a spokesperson for Oregon State Police told us that first trooper, who had a couple of things to say and then placed that first order, is on paid administrative leave. The other 3 at this point are not, but we're told the entire incident is under investigation. But I mean, Dan, at the same time, we've been talking about this. This just kind of really highlights the awkward position that a lot of business owners are in right now, that they're kind of having to enforce this mask mandate. And as I said, the staff at that coffee shop told the Oregonian they had turned away other patrons for doing the exact same thing. But then here come a few state troopers who don't want to comply with the mask mandate. And that's when that assistant manager said he felt nervous, and they were really between a rock and a hard place.
Absolutely. You take that awkward situation and times it by 10 when the person you're talking to is wearing a badge. Maggie, thank you so much.
Now, I want to continue this discussion for just a minute, because this bit here is kind of similar to the whole ordeal with the state troopers. Earlier this week, the city of Sandy sent out this letter here saying that Clackamas County told them to shut down their fireworks show because it would violate the governor's executive order about large gatherings. The city said, yeah, they're disappointed, but they get it. They'll shut it down. This is for the health and safety of the public, and they were still encouraging everyone to keep social distancing and wearing masks. But that wasn't the end of it, because apparently the mayor of Sandy has a much different opinion than what the city itself is saying. Mayor Stan Pulliam made this very long Facebook post saying, and I'll read a part of it for you here. He said, quote, "Our governor and her power-hungry bureaucracy have bullied our citizens out of being able to celebrate Independence Day." He goes on to talk about the importance of celebrating July 4th, and he continued to criticize the governor. But nowhere in any of those words did he mention anything about a pandemic or public health and safety or social distancing. Look, I love hot dogs. All right? I love fireworks and a cold beer on my back deck. My wife bought me this red, white, and blue shirt for flipping burgers this weekend. Yesterday, this was great. I was walking down the street with my 3-year-old son, and he started asking me what the flag was, because, you know, everybody has the little American flags lined up and down in front of their houses. He wanted to know what it meant. I loved it. It was like an amazing moment. But so is this moment in time. Yes, I will miss fireworks. But doesn't it feel American to work together on this, to pull together and take on a common enemy? That's the story I want to tell my son when he asks about this. Now, on that note, I got this email I want to respond to. It says, you keep saying that everyone should wear masks and follow the governor's order for masks, but I do not see you, news outlets, governors, and many others. Is everyone at their house with only immediate family there? I guess it's just another do as I say, not as I do moment. P.S. I like the show. So I can't speak to everyone that you mentioned there, but here is why I don't wear a mask during the show. I am the only one in here. It's just me and a bunch of robotic cameras, and that's true for almost all the anchors here. Every once in a while, we'll have a two-anchor show, but when they do, everybody's on like opposite sides of this enormous room. You'll notice that when Laurel Porter comes on next at 6:30, it's just her. And when I leave the studio and walk around in the newsroom, everybody wears masks. There aren't many people in the newsroom nowadays anyway, just a handful of us. But I appreciate the question. Nothing worse than a hypocrite. I agree with you there. And always feel free to call me out or ask for clarity. That is what this show is all about. And speaking of clarity, let's get the facts on this question here from Linda W. She asks, I keep hearing that a person's O2 stats lower if you wear a mask. Can you verify? Yes, we can. Here's Kristen Severance.
We took her question to Dr. Pyle Coley, a Harvard Medical School graduate and cardiologist.
It's absolutely not true that wearing a mask is going to limit how much oxygen is getting into your bloodstream.
Dr. Coley points to a now viral post by Dr. Megan Hall in California, helping to disprove the wearing a mask will lower my oxygen levels theory.
And this has actually been proven by a doctor who measured her own oxygen saturation while wearing nothing at all, and then she put on a surgical mask, and then she put on an N95 respirator and a surgical mask, and her oxygen level remained normal.
She said it may feel like you're working a little harder to breathe, and that's because you are, but it's not harmful.
So for most healthy adults, even though there's a slightly increased work of breathing, so you have to work a little harder to get that air in because you have a barrier between you and the air that's getting in, the actual impact on your oxygen saturation would be negligible.
Your O2 stats will not lower if you're wearing a mask.
Because think about all the surgeons, all the dentists, all the people who work in the operating room who wear masks all day, every day for many, many, many years of their lives. And there's nothing wrong with their oxygen levels. They're not having carbon dioxide poisoning. So it really is a myth that's been propagated because there's a lot of concern that people have about wearing masks, whether it's for political reasons or because they feel that it reflects illness or because they feel like it's an expression of their freedom. But I have to say, for me, I actually think that wearing a mask is empowering and it's a way to exercise our freedom because masks allow us to do the things that we wouldn't normally be able to do in this type of a pandemic.
Okay, Kristen Severance joining us now. I really like that last point that she made there.
Yes, she said everyone wants to talk about masks and, freedoms. She said wearing a mask, gives you the freedom to go do something safely.
Did she tackle any other myths?
Yes, she said, I don't know if you've seen the post going around that, wearing a mask could give you carbon dioxide poisoning. She said that is absolutely not true.
Got it. Kristen Severance, thank you.
You bet.
Massive protests during a pandemic. Sounds like a recipe for disaster, when it turns out, surprisingly, it hasn't caused a spike in cases. And we're digging even deeper into the KGW vault, back to the Christmas flood of 1964.
Heavy rains began, and the rains continued as storm after storm came in from the southwest.
When the story continues.
Welcome back. I'm sure you got your phone in your hand. We all do during the breaks. I walk over and grab mine, take a look at it. If you're on social media, you're scrolling through, stop on Twitter, stop on Facebook, reach out, say hello, use that hashtag #HeyDan. We're going to talk about some of your comments and questions at the end of the show. Here's some we've been getting recently. This one from Rod. Do you suppose the uptick in COVID-19 cases is related to the masses of protesters disregarding the social distancing standards that those not involved in the protests are told they must adhere to? Well, Rod, I don't need to make any assumptions on this one because we're actually getting some info on that now. Multnomah County told us today that they're not seeing many cases from people who have been to the protests, and apparently that's been true across the country. There's this new study from the National Bureau of Economic Research, and they found protests did not cause a spike in coronavirus cases. They looked at 315 cities where demonstrations happened over the past month. Researchers found that social distancing actually increased in these cities because people who weren't protesting decided to stay home or inside. But what about the people who actually gathered together for those demonstrations? I mean, just look at this video. The Washington Post says less than 1% of protesters in Minneapolis tested positive, compared to the statewide average of 3.5%. Officials are thinking that that's probably because the protests were outside and they were in the open air and most people were wearing masks. Here's a question from Tom. Hey, Dan, probably a coincidence, but both COVID-19 deaths in Lincoln County are listed as not having underlying conditions. Have any others in the state died while otherwise healthy? So first of all, a little clarification, actually a massive clarification here. Lincoln County says that they had a reporting error, and both of those people who died actually did have underlying conditions. But it is still an interesting question because we've been talking for months about how people with chronic health problems are the most at risk, but they're not the only ones. And we're still working to get some numbers from the state. The Oregon Health Authority has not really been that responsive at all to some of our questions. But on June 12th, the Oregonian reported that 4 people with no underlying health conditions had died from COVID-19 statewide. Now, worldwide, here's what the CDC is saying. Between January and the end of May, deaths were 12 times higher among those with underlying health conditions than those without, and hospitalizations were 6 times higher. So basically, people with health conditions are obviously much more at risk, but it doesn't mean that they're the only ones who are getting sick and dying. People who are young and seem perfectly healthy have died as well. And I know that is stressful news. In fact, life is pretty stressful in general right now. The CDC put out a report yesterday that 1/3 of Americans have experienced symptoms of anxiety and depression since last April. It gets even worse in Oregon. You see that dark green color over there? About 42% of us are having those same symptoms. And if you ask an expert how to treat those feelings, they're going to give you about 1,000 different options. Medicine, exercise, maybe religion or meditation. And now, I guess in the spirit of 2020, you can add magic mushrooms to that list in Oregon. Initiative Petition 34 will almost certainly be on the November ballot and could allow you to legally use magic mushrooms, or more specifically, the psychedelic compound psilocybin. That's the part that makes you trip or hallucinate. And according to some studies, a whole lot more. I talked to a spokesperson for the group that collected all the signatures to get this on the ballot. Listen here.
I've been involved with progressive drug policy reform for over 10 years here in Oregon, and I have met and worked with a lot of people who are suffering from mental health conditions. And I simply think there are more alternatives, such as psilocybin therapy, that Oregonians deserve access to. And so I really come at this from a healthcare perspective and being able to provide people more opportunities to explore things that might work for them better than what they're trying now.
There have been lots of studies on the effects of psilocybin over the years. I would say maybe the most heavily referenced study by anyone trying to advocate for this type of therapy was a study out of Johns Hopkins. They tested the effects of a controlled dose on 15 people who were addicted to cigarettes. And when they checked back 6 months after the one dose, 12 of them had quit that very day and hadn't smoked since. That's an 80% success rate. Vox actually interviewed one of the people from that study. Here's a little clip we'll show you. And keep in mind, the video editing definitely matches the tone of the interview.
It was the most peaceful, joyous, incredible, life-changing experience I've ever had in my life. There were scary parts, foreboding parts. I always knew there was beautiful and joy and peace on the other side of it. It was freeing.
You can find tons of various studies online and interviews with people like that. Some say psilocybin can cure anxiety and OCD. The New Yorker talked to a man who says the drug helped him accept his death after a terminal cancer diagnosis.
I don't think I've ever experienced, ever, the gratitude that I felt. And gratitude for what? It was just gratitude. I don't like to talk about it because it's really beyond words.
Now, as interesting and possibly as promising as all that sounds, these studies all suffer from very small sample sizes, and that invites doubt into their findings. I talked to Dr. Chris Stauffer today, who worked on a psilocybin study in the Bay Area at UC San Francisco, which was operating at the time under FDA guidelines, which is new. He says if we pass this bill in Oregon, it would bypass the FDA altogether.
But what are some of the risks of bypassing their approval procedure to kind of fast track something like this?
Well, I think we wouldn't have the solid safety data that we would have if we went through the FDA. To conduct an FDA phase 2 or phase 3 clinical trial takes a lot of effort, a lot of people, a lot of paperwork, and everything is scrutinized. So every tiny thing that could be an adverse event is documented and investigated, and we wouldn't necessarily have that.
Instead, Oregon's magic mushroom bill would include a 2-year development period. And in that time, the OHA and an advisory board appointed by the governor would work with experts and try and kind of fine-tune exactly what this would look like, what the process would be. And they hope that steps like that will overcome the stigma associated with psychedelics.
Stigma is tackled through education. It's plain and simple. And we know from our polling research that shows when we are able to educate Oregon voters on what psilocybin is, who stands to benefit from psilocybin, and what the research is showing, we know that Oregonians are with us.
Now, you may have noticed I wasn't exactly clear at the beginning on whether this would exactly be on the ballot, saying that it was all but certain. So you need 112,020 signatures to get something on the ballot. The group turned in 135,000 in May, and the state then authorized 106,000, leaving them about 6,000 short. But they then turned in an additional 31,000 new signatures and believe that out of that number, they will get enough valid ones to, in fact, be on the ballot. Now, I know, again, you got your phone in your hand, so tweet us your thoughts. Let us know what you're thinking about the show. Use that hashtag, HeyDan. I want to know your opinions. We're going to talk about some comments coming up. Plus, we're digging back into the KGW vault more than 50 years. We're going to finish the story right after this. All right, welcome back. Hey, we know you guys love the KGW Vault segment. We do too. You're giving us a ton of great ideas with the hashtag HeyDan. We want to take a look now at a viewer comment that came in not too long ago. He says, "Hey Dan, how about the 1964 flood? It might have happened before you were born, but some of us old-timers remember it well and would like a refresher." So this was also known as the Christmas flood of 1964 because it happened over the holidays. It caused hundreds of millions of dollars in damage and more than a dozen people died. Here's what we found in the KGW vault.
Disaster hit us again to make the big story of 1964. It was in December, in the middle of the holiday season. After an early heavy snow on the mountains, the temperature dropped suddenly to 7 degrees here in the lower Willamette Valley. And then just as suddenly, it became unseasonably warm and mild. Heavy rains began, and the rains continued as storm after storm came in from the southwest. The combination of melting snow and ice combined with the heavy rains was too much. We suffered the worst flooding since the one in 1948 that wiped out the city of Vanport. Rivers changed their courses, and many homes and cabins were lost. And no sooner had we almost cleaned up the mess when another flood hit us a scant 5 weeks later. It was a very wet winter.
We've been in the vault a lot, and from a reporter's standpoint, that might be one of my favorites. We love watching those old clips, but it kind of reminds me, that certain style they had back then of something that we put together a little earlier this year when the internet went down for the entire Tillamook County government. This is what we put together.
Good evening and welcome to The Story with old-timey news anchor Dan Haggerty, reporting to you from Tillamook County, which has been positively blasted back to the ancient times of 1991.
That was fun. That was a lot of fun. We have some really talented editors, too. Hey, if you have any ideas for the vault, you want us to look back in time, if you want old-timey Dan to do another story for you, give me an idea. Email us at thestory@kgw.com. Leave me a Facebook message. Use hashtag HeyDan, any of that stuff. We got so many comments tonight. I think, we had some controversial stuff. We had the story about the state troopers off the bat. A lot of comments about masks and things like that. Getting some comments about mushrooms. As you see, we take our time, we look through these things, and we try to really build substance around them so we can follow up in further newscasts. We want you to keep watching because we might talk about some of the stuff you're thinking about. I do want to read this. We were talking about how people have been clinically kind of anxious and depressed across the state, and we said, how about in Oregon? And Mike said, did you really think it was necessary to point out the state of Oregon with a red arrow? I believe most of the viewers probably know where Oregon is. You're probably right. It's the old lesson of try not to overthink things, and sometimes we do. Appreciate you being with us tonight. Thanks as always. The news at 6:30 is next with Laurel Porter. For tonight, that's The Story. We'll see you back here tomorrow.